Welcome back to the Kyber Collective. I'm one of your three hosts, Flowers, and I'm joined by Annie.
Hello.
And Sig.
Hi.
Today we are covering the topic of, were the Jedi wrong? You hear a lot of different viewpoints on this, depending on who you talk to, even depending on what era of fan you're talking to. But let's just answer the basic, straightforward question everyone wants to know. Were they actually baby snatchers? Were they wrong? Everything that they did? What are your first thoughts on this?
No, the Jedi have done nothing wrong in their entire lives. Great episode, guys.
The end.
The end. We don't need to record anymore. I think this was a good 30 seconds. We'll see you next
week on the Kyber Collective.
But it's wild because I did a little bit of research on this and trying to see different perspectives. And I can say right now, especially, and perhaps when the prequels came out too, there's not a lot of love for the Jedi in a fandom sense. I mean, we all want them around and we all think they're cool. But there's this resounding notion of, well, if they'd just done this, then this wouldn't have happened. Or they probably deserved it because they're wrong in what they're doing. I feel like a lot of these things come from a place of like, you clearly care about the characters, you don't like how things turned out, but there's a disconnect in how you view the story versus how the story was told. Because like, I think it was very straightforward on George Lucas's explanation of the Jedi on what their role was in the galaxy, on what the Sith did to the galaxy and what the Sith were doing in the prequel era. So what are your thoughts on why people have such a big problem with them? Let's just go straight into that.
Well, I think people are very attached to the whole attachment thing. I don't think that they can imagine. It's like they're putting themselves in the situation. Like, how would I handle this? And, most people love their attachments.
Yeah.
But being a Jedi isn't for everyone.
Yeah, I think I'm not old enough to know what the initial response to the Jedi was, but I think it was pretty cool. Like, when it was Luke and it was the original trilogy and like that, a lot of people grew up, I think, wanting to be like Luke Skywalker. I imagine there were lots of, wrapping paper roll, lightsaber fights in backyards and all that kind of stuff. The vibe that I have quite strongly is that a bunch of people got to the prequels who'd really loved those films and decided that the prequels were not what they were expecting and that the Jedi Council was not what they were expecting. And from that, I guess we get this misunderstanding of what the Jedi Council stands for, I guess, because it isn't really in keeping with a kind of very traditional Western hero. Because I think the archetype for that is normally like the swashbuckling hero gets the girl.
Yeah, you're right. Back in the original 3 days, the Jedi were like this mysterious group of people who had died out. No one really knew what a bunch of them together alive was like. Yeah, we all know how the prequels went over.
Yeah, like a lead balloon. I wonder as well if part of it, I have no data concrete to back this up. This is purely speculation and a gut theory, and it feels a bit like mean speculation, but I'm going to say it. I wonder if fan culture and the way that people who engage in fan culture by writing fan fiction in particular might have a lot of problems with the Jedi's philosophy, because it doesn't really lend itself to the nature of fan fiction very well. I mean, people watch whatever it is they watch, and then they want to go and write stories about the two attractive people that they just watched on screen getting it on. Mm-hmm. And that does not work. I mean, there is something I think that actually is quite appealing and romantic to many people about this idea of being the one that turns the guy who's sworn never to love. And I think that's why the Obi-Wan and Satine plot line goes down so well, and why Obi-Wan for some reason is falling in love with a different woman in every single published Star Wars book, to the point that I'm begging that plot line to end. But there is something, I think a lot of people a lot of women feel like the idea of being the one that kind of fixes or teaches a man to love is kind of it's certainly a genre, And I wonder if that as a baseline is kind of thrumming through because a lot of the conversations, at least that we're engaging with that are talking about the Jedi, are in very online spaces amongst fans who are also engaging in those aspects of fandom.
Yeah.
And then the other side is the group of people who are really into the Sith.
There's some hardcore Sith out there.
And that one I find, I don't know, is it an aesthetic thing? Is it, I don't know what it is. Darth Maul is cool, don't get me wrong. Darth Vader, hilarious, cool, I like him. But I don't get the Sith thing, and I struggle to understand the appeal.
I know my brother got into the Sith by playing video games.
That'll do it.
He loves Revan.
Yeah, that is something that I saw referenced a lot of like why certain fans are more not with the Jedi, or like it's because they've played some of these games and they have different perspectives on things, and it definitely informs some opinions, as does writing fanfic, I think.
Yeah, it definitely does. I agree. And then, like, when you're playing these games, I mean, you're playing, like, as them, right? I'm not a huge gamer. I'm not a gamer at all, actually. So...
Which is fair.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I game is, like, hidden objects, that's my gaming. I really have never played an RPG. I know that's probably, like, insane, but...
It's not insane.
I imagine that you get really involved.
Yeah, I'm not a Mandalorian person, which a lot of people are, and that's cool. I think it's like a lot of people are Sith people, but like there's this kind of like marriage of because I think the KOTOR games, the Knights of the Old Republic games, are probably one of the really big ones for people who are really into Star Wars gaming. Certainly Revan and that plotline has left a huge impact on the fandom. And they're also like, they've got a lot of Mandalorian plotlines, and it engages in the like Mandalorian Jedi War, and like some people are really like pro Mandalorian in that regard too, like ancient Mandalorian. And obviously a lot of the content we're getting now is quite Mandalorian related, so that is going through a little bit of a revival. And like, and it is the thing, it's like people who like the Klingons, like they're just a kind of like there's depth there if that's what you're into, but they're also just like kind of a warrior people, and I just find the like big man with big stick mentality really boring, but it clearly appeals to a lot of people. And I think it's just one of those impasses that I'm never going to wrap my head around. And maybe for a lot of people, the idea of the Jedi being these like pacifists who want to think everything through and act compassionately and that's really boring to a lot of people. I can certainly see that being the case. I think it might be boring to my brother. That might be a disservice to my brother.
It's not as passionate.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like, I think it is. It's like people who like Vulcans versus people who like Klingon. This is the nature of man.
I think you've cracked the code here, Sig. You found the pattern. So I've read through some things that people have said that, well, the Jedi have lied, and the things that they've lied about are things that Anakin figured out. That you wouldn't get more strength through anger or using the dark side. Anakin was clearly right about that. He was stronger. You know, that's one of the things that. So that was wrong to kind of like, I guess, hide this information or. I know.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'll save.
That the Jedi were peacekeepers is something that they were wrong about. They're not peacekeepers mostly, and in Anakin's life, Jedi were kind of the anti-peacekeeper. They were mostly soldiers, which with the Clone Wars I understand, but I think calling them not peacekeepers is interesting. The other lie is that the Jedi have told was that the Sith were evil and that you shouldn't be in love. So
I'm waiting for the Jedi to tell an actual lie, but okay, carry on.
These are, I mean, I don't agree with them, but this is some of the stuff that a lot of people seem to rally around. Like, you know, there's a lot of deception in what the Jedi were doing and their intentions. So let's go straight to the thing that I think a lot of Star Wars focuses on, the cautionary tale of Anakin and the decisions that he made, which made him believe that the Jedi were wrong. Like he said in the Battle of Mustafar, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil.
No, because he couldn't get everything he wanted. I mean, it was more about him than it was about anything else.
Do you think that, and I feel like there are things that they've made mistakes, and were they wrong about how they dealt with Anakin?
It depends. There's a bit of a question of scale here, right? Like, do I think that they handled every interaction with Anakin in the best possible way that they could? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that means that Anakin was right to make the decisions that he made? No. It's a question. If you asked me, did the Jedi Council and Obi-Wan Kenobi or Anakin Skywalker make worse decisions? The answer is Anakin Skywalker.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm sure that perhaps they could have found ways to deal better with him at times. I think that they weren't relating to him. I personally think that they were correct in their first instance to say that they didn't want him as a Padawan, and that actually that probably would have been the correct call.
Yeah.
But then we would have had no films, so it's really obvious why he became a Padawan.
Yeah.
It's almost like this idea that like everything Anakin says is an absolute truth, because like what specifically, a lot of the things that people point to as problems, I get really frustrated because they say like, oh, they gave Anakin really bad advice. It's like, okay, I see what you're saying, but also Anakin didn't give them the information that he needed to give them for them to give him good advice. If somebody comes to you and gives you half of the problem they're having, there's a really good chance that the advice that you give them about that problem is going to be shit, because you don't know what the actual problem is. And he was like, well, I'm having some dreams about someone dying. It doesn't mention that it's somebody that he's in love with, that he's really worried about dying because she's carrying his children. And I feel like that might have slightly impacted what Yoda would have said to him. Maybe.
Well, yeah. Also, but like, why would you go to Yoda in the first place?
That
like,
too.
He had to know what Yoda was like, that he was going to get a riddle, instead of actual real life advice. He's 800 years old. His life experience is a little different than Anakin's. I'm not sure who I would have went to. Maybe like Plo Koon or somebody, but like, not Yoda.
Yeah, I get this. I guess the reasoning there was he's the wisest of the order, and he would have the answer to something this complicated. But it's like you said, Sig, like you only get half of a good advice if you tell half of what you're asking for. So like if I came to you and I said, hey, I'm bleeding, my hand's bleeding, what should I do? And you're like, well, you should probably rinse it. And it's like the background info is that, hey, I lost 3 fingers and it's bleeding out, so maybe I should do something about that first, not just the blood that's coming out. Like you need to know all the information. And I think Anakin, it's easy to see because he's kind of the main character, right? In the main central focus, if I should say, in the prequels, that this is kind of, we're seeing it on what went wrong with him. But we're seeing the full story of like the Jedi had a philosophy and a way of life, and Anakin was not fitting in it. So I don't know that I wouldn't consider that the fault of the Jedi because somebody didn't want to practice it. It's that they wanted to do that and they wanted to do everything else.
And the narrative constantly gives us counterpoints at various like stages of people who are put in similar positions to ones that Anakin is, and who react in very different ways. And I think this happens most with Obi-Wan. But we certainly have all of the conversations that happen within the Clone Wars TV show about Obi-Wan and Satine. And he explicitly, I think during the Clovis arc, he sits down and he's like, look, you are now privy to the fact that I loved Satine. And I told her that I would leave the order for her. And we both agreed that that's not what we wanted to do. But it's not unnatural to feel that way. But I've made a commitment to this order and I'm going to stick with it. And I think Obi-Wan even says explicitly, like, Anakin, your first commitment is to the order in Attack of the Clones, when he's rationalizing with Anakin why they should just leave Padme behind and continue after Dooku. And it's like we have these counterpoint examples of people being in very similar situations, but Anakin has this kind of have his cake and eat it too mentality where he feels like, well, I couldn't possibly choose. I couldn't leave my position of prestige as a member of the order. Or if you wanted to look at it more kindly, leave my family. And it's like, but those are the choices that you have to make. And you see routinely other characters make better versions of those choices. And to me, it has always seemed clear that Anakin was making really poor versions of those choices.
Definitely. If you're split and if you're divided like that, I don't think you can give your full attention to either of those things. And we kind of did see that. Like, I wouldn't say he was a good partner to Padme, and I wouldn't say that he was a great member of the Jedi. He was a very helpful member of the Jedi, but I don't think he was able to practice being a Jedi as you should be.
And the Clone Wars is full of episodes in which Anakin effectively abandons important duties that he's on in order to rescue Padme from some circumstance or another, which is exactly the sort of thing that the whole idea of not having attachments outside the Order is designed to prevent. Not having attachments in general, sorry.
Yeah.
We also see him get aggressive in protecting people that he cares about. He force chokes someone in order to get information that is meant to help Ahsoka. Obviously, he kills all the Tuskens in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
And we see other, we see Luminara, we see other Padawan-master relationships in which the Master does not do that. We also see people die. I mean, we see Satine die. We see, I forget their names, but there's that Clone Wars, the arc with Fives, where he finds out about the chip, where one of the clones shoots the sister of another Jedi.
Yeah.
And we see them dealing with the fallout and the anger that results from that and how to let it go. Like, we are constantly seeing examples of other Jedi do a better job of handling their emotions than Anakin.
I guess this circles back to, is their understanding or practice of the Force itself a flaw? Because you hear this a lot of like, well, this is why the Sith have a better handle on things. This is why they get things done. This is why they were able to succeed against the Jedi. This is, why their tenets are better. I guess I should say it's not the canon tenets in terms of George Lucas's work, but whatever the Sith practice and believe in is the complete opposite of what the Jedi do. Were they wrong about the Force and how it should be used and how there's like a understanding of balance?
Honestly, like I feel like this comes from extended universe stuff that George Lucas didn't write. You know what I mean? Like the games and the books, and when people, it was, basically fan fiction when people wanted to write these relationships and love stories.
I think there's also an argument for people who adhere to the sequel era now, like the understanding of the Force there.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated thing.
It's complicated and it's confused.
It's confusing. I think The Last Jedi muddled some things, honestly. The Force Awakens didn't really go into it too much, but The Last Jedi...
I mean, coming back to one of the supposed lies that the Jedi told us, that the Sith are stronger. I'm going to get mildly political, but I kind of think the best analogy in my mind is the uber rich of the world, the extremely wealthy, really don't accumulate wealth on their own merits. They accumulate wealth through exploitation. It is impossible to become obscenely wealthy without effectively exploiting other people and the loopholes. And actually, some of the richest people in the world are also the stingiest, and that's how they become the richest.
Yeah.
And that kind of is how I feel about, when you're talking about the Sith accomplishing things or the Sith having more power. Yes, perhaps they have achieved more, but what exactly have they accomplished, and what is the nature of that power? That power is exploitative. That power has no care for others. That power is about individual achievement, often at the expense of other people. And like the things the Sith accomplish are galactic war and fascism. So I'm not really sure that I can consider those like accomplishments. I think it's just like,
and
that's a great accomplishment, right? That.
And you always have to watch your back too, because your apprentice is going to murder you at some point, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that the inherent in the nature of the Sith is this ultimate failure, that someday you become so powerful that anything you teach to pass on to extend that power eventually comes to usurp you. Why is this even an argument?
It doesn't sound funny.
It's like, why is this even an argument is the defining feature of my research in this, because as I was formulating this episode and the topics, I was like, the clear answer is no. All of these are very, if you even just think about it, it's like, no. But I guess if you had the biases necessary and you looked through things in a very one-dimensional way, or your understanding of the Force in terms of what is balance is confused, then yeah, you're gonna have a lot of differing opinions on this. But I feel like with the Sith in particular, I get the sense that there's not a lot of understanding in what the Sith and the Jedi's relationship really was.
Yeah, I mean, the one disclaimer I will give is that obviously I'm biased in favor of the Jedi because that is the aspect of Star Wars that has interested me. So the bulk of my engagement with fandom has been in things that are Jedi positive or focus on the Jedi. So I have not read, for example, the Darth Bane trilogy. I haven't read a lot of the kind of very heavily Sith focused stuff. So it's difficult for me to understand the viewpoint that comes at it from this being, because just because you enjoy it doesn't necessarily mean you idolize it, right? But
Yeah.
where I struggle is the leap between like taking the Sith as interesting and turning it into the Sith have a point, which then turns into the Jedi were in fact lying or wrong about, like when you start circling in that direction, I get a little bit confused, because you can love villains, you can really enjoy villains. All of us here, everyone in this podcast has enjoyed a good villain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to defend that villain or that I need to legitimize or justify the behavior of that villain. From the bits of the Sith that I have engaged in, at times I find them, I love Palpatine.
Yeah, he's a
I
great villain.
I love Vader. I enjoy both of them. I've read stuff that focuses on both of them and had an absolute blast, but that doesn't mean I think their point of view is correct. And that's where I get very confused. Because it is fundamentally an extremely individualist point of view. It's an extremely selfish point of view, and it's a very ends justify the means point of view for personal enrichment. And to me, that is actually the epitome of evil.
So if we want to hear from the mouth of George Lucas himself, he says a really clear explanation on the Jedi and the Sith. And he said, there was never a war between the Jedi and the Sith Lords. The Sith Lords were in control for a long time, and that's what happens when you have a world full of Sith Lords. Oh, and what happens when you have a world full of Sith Lords? They start killing each other to see who's going to be the top Sith Lord. They don't vote, they just kill. It's the medieval feudal system. Then the Republic came to power, and the Jedi brought peace into the galaxy by being ambassadors and troubleshooters. So when the Senate decides to do something, or the Jedi Council discovers something that's amiss, the Jedi fix it. They don't like to fight people. They're monk warriors. They're monks first, and they try to convince people to get along. And if you don't comply, your hands come off. They use their power to keep governments of all the planets in line so that they don't do terrible things again. And I feel like that is the moral compass of the Star Wars universe. It's very clear and concise. And like you said, you can have interesting villains. You can have people with a very compelling backstory, but it doesn't change the fact that their actions were wrong. So like Anakin's actions were wrong. Vader's actions subsequently were wrong. You can have a really incredible... He is an example of someone with a great backstory. It doesn't mean that their choices were correct. And it doesn't mean that the institution that he was learning to be a good person in was incorrect.
Yeah.
Like if you're defined as the moral of the galaxy, like the moral compass basically, which is how George Lucas describes them, as the most moral of anybody in the galaxy, and that the Sith practice the dark side and are way out of balance versus the Jedi, who are as close to balance as you can get. Mm-hmm. I think that presents a very clear picture of what you should be doing in the Star Wars universe versus what can throw things into such imbalance. And that's like my own struggle point, because I know balance itself is kind of redefined now, or maybe some people have different interpretations of it.
People definitely have different interpretations. And I mean, I guess you have raised what I think is a much more nuanced and credible argument about the Jedi's behavior. And it's clear in the way George Lucas talks about them that he considers them kind of an absolute good. And I do think that they are framed that way in the films, even though some people have taken the prequels to be a criticism of the Jedi. That's not my reading, and I don't believe that that's meant to be a reading of the films. But
no, yeah.
Star Wars is also kind of a parable. Like, I think if these were real people and we were talking about like real people in a real world who had magic powers, I do think there is something inherently troubling or problematic about treating them as an absolute moral authority. Mm-hmm. Yes, they have prescience. Yes, they have, ways of discerning that are preternatural or supernatural, right from wrong, and so on and so forth. But, no one should really be an absolute moral authority. But it's essentially a fable, and you have absolute good and you have absolute bad. So within the nature of Star Wars as a story, that's never bothered me. But I can certainly, as the story evolves and as the story grows and as the story kind of moves away from the things that George Lucas has himself written, I can understand that line of argument a lot more. And I think it is an interesting question to cover, kind of the nature of the Jedi as an absolute moral authority, and also how that changes during the Clone Wars when the Jedi themselves admit that they no longer have the abilities that would allow them to discern what's to come and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it was like a fascinating story of how they got there. Like, they never had any malicious intent, but the militarization, they were manipulated, and they did make mistakes. But I don't think that they made any mistakes like out of incompetence or malice, or they're always trying to do what was right. I mean, it's a tragedy.
It is, and I think that's a lot of what the prequel trilogy is. It's a tragic telling of how the demise of the Jedi happened. And George Lucas has made it clear that they're not like law enforcement. They're not supposed to be. They're meant to be peacekeepers. There's history of why they're peacekeepers, and it's supposed to be a departure of how the Jedi are once the Clone Wars begins.
Yeah.
Because they go from being just like an ambassador to, okay, now they're generals. Now they're leading armies. They don't want to kill people. They don't fight. They're supposed to be ambassadors. And that a lot of people, there are a lot of Jedi that think that the Jedi sold out. And this is a quote from George, that maybe they should never have been in the military, but it's a tough call. It's one of the conundrums of which there's a bunch of people in the movies that you have to think through. Do you stick with your moral compass or your moral rules and all will be killed, which makes it irrelevant, or do they help save the Republic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does the end justify the means?
Yeah. And thematically it's really consistent. I mean, I think it's quite telling. This is my argument against why I think the prequels is a kind of criticism of the Jedi Order, I guess, is because they're intrinsically linked with the fall of democracy and the rise of democracy. Democracy rises as the Jedi Order rises, and the Jedi Order's tenets are about compassion, respect for all other people, and treating all people as equal, which is also a tenet essentially of democracy if it's done correctly. The fall of democracy leads to the rise of the Sith and the rise of fascism, which is about individualism. So I think it's pretty clear what George thinks of those two things.
Yeah, for sure.
But as the Jedi Order loses the ability to see, loses their capabilities, and gets involved in a no-win militarization that's meant to be helping people, but ultimately is fighting each other. And I think one of the most symbolic and powerful moments of that in the Clone Wars is, of course, when Pong Krell makes the two clone regiments shoot each other, which is essentially what is happening on a massive scale across the galaxy. The Jedi are experiencing the fall of the Jedi Order at the same time as the fall of democracy, and it's at the hands of the same person. But we don't, of course, there are things to criticize that was happening in the Republic, but that doesn't mean that the Republic is wrong. And Padme is a very, very clear character voicing that fact. It is the entire reason that the rebellion essentially exists. It's made very, very clear that the rebellion are the good guys. Like,
yeah. Repeatedly.
Yes, the Jedi are flawed, but it's part of the nature of the fall of democracy and the rise of fascism is that their intrinsic nature is being exploited, and that they're attempting to respond to the times as best they can, but the times themselves are unclear. The times themselves are being manipulated, and therefore their response is being manipulated.
Yeah, and it does really just go back to how do you respond when these are your circumstances? I always feel like the question of were the Jedi wrong comes with the double edge of so the Sith were right. And I can't, in the way that the story has been told for Star Wars as a whole, believe that that's what George Lucas's message was, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's pretty explicit that it's not. I was just going to snarkily say that I guess you could make an argument that they're more powerful.
You could. A lot of people do. They argue that they're more strong, so clearly that was the right way to go. But my understanding of what the Jedi made mistakes in are not the same as the criticisms that are most popular for the Jedi. Because Do they make mistakes? Absolutely. They do make mistakes. They're like anybody else, but it's not for the same reason. Like I think it was like you said, they made a mistake allowing Anakin to be part of the order. It clearly was their first call was right. I think letting him get away with the amount that he did was a mistake. He got away with a lot, and we've seen it in the Clone Wars how he constantly got away with everything that he was doing, and the Order was well aware of it. But because they needed him and they were like, we just need to get through this, and then we'll end the war. And that's the mentality that went into it. And because the dark side was clouding their vision, they're like in a fog now. They can't anticipate anything. They can't. They're like the thing that they used to guide them is no longer there for them to use. So it's all circumstances, and they made mistakes. I just don't think that those mistakes are the same ones that I think a lot of the naysayers are citing.
Yeah, I get really cranky with all the Anakin was treated so badly by the Jedi branch of fandom because the Clone Wars is a thesis of how he was clearly the golden child that was allowed to do whatever he wanted. He is that really annoying sibling that can literally murder someone in the living room, and mom is like, "That's amazing, sweetie. I'm putting it on the fridge." He just fucks off all the time. He doesn't follow any instructions. Mace Windu is like, please, for once, please just listen to us and please stay where you're supposed to be. And he's like, "Nah, fam, I'm out." And the whole order is like, "That's fine. It's Anakin. He's a good boy. We love Anakin. He doesn't show up on time for anything. He's late for all of his meetings. He's clearly off just fucking Padme at random points." And they're like, "We saw nothing." He gets away with everything. They clearly love the shit out of him.
Yeah.
And trust him. They trust him with a Padawan. Anakin, they looked at that man and thought, he can teach someone. That is being blinded by the fact that they were doing their best, man. They
were. And that's the thing. They loved him. And I love that you brought that up because they put so much faith in him against better judgment, against anything that should have guided their decision making. And it was because of that things, continued to unfold the way Anakin chose.
And they were supportive of. There are so many scenes in the Clone Wars of them being supportive of him as a teacher and supportive of him as a Jedi. And when he screws up, they're incredibly supportive. And it just, for every example of Yoda giving nebulous advice for a situation he doesn't fully understand, there are loads of examples of the Jedi giving wonderful advice to Anakin for the work that he's doing. So I really can't abide by the theory that he was mistreated in any way by the Jedi.
I'm so impatient with the argument of these big meanie little Jedi. They're just so awful to him, and it was through trauma that he endured. And I was like, no, he didn't. He got his butt kissed all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, he was the chosen one.
Yeah, he was a chosen one, and he was ambitious and clearly had a strong connection with the Force and could do things a lot faster and quicker than most other people. But he had no discipline, and I feel like that also is something that slipped through the cracks because it's Anakin.
Yeah. Well, he's precisely that kind of gifted that can almost get you away with coasting, you don't actually have to try very hard because you're so gifted. So everyone lets you get away with coasting. At the risk of being mildly spicy, a lot of the vitriol about the Jedi and Anakin gets directed at Mace Windu.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Yes, it does.
You're very right.
I don't think that you can divorce that from the fact that he's played by Samuel L. Jackson, who is a black man. And a lot of times, for some reason, instead of it being Mace Windu, it's very clearly a Samuel L. Jackson kind of
movie
pastiche.
Character.
Yeah, it's a mixture of Pulp Fiction and Snakes on a Plane and maybe Nick Fury. I don't know, but it's not Mace Windu because Mace Windu is at worst stern, but he's clearly a man who is just in charge of an organization and who takes his job very seriously. He is not worse than any of the other Jedi on the Council. He is not less approachable than any of the other Jedi on the Council. There's a massive element of racism in the way that people talk about Anakin's mistreatment.
Yes, there is.
Because of the role that Mace Windu plays in it.
And when you actually look at it, it's nothing more than Mace Windu being blunt, honest and a little stern.
Yeah.
I guess like he didn't smile enough, or he wasn't as coddling enough.
Well, and what gets me is people really harp on Mace Windu saying that he doesn't trust Anakin, but Mace Windu is correct. Like,
That's
he was right.
Yeah.
he was 100% correct. And
Yeah.
he's present. One of the times that I think you can make an argument that perhaps the Jedi legitimately did let Anakin down is the moment when Anakin slaughters the Tuskens. We hear Qui-Gon screaming no, and it sounds like Yoda both hears Qui-Gon and is aware that something very negative has happened with Anakin. And we don't on screen see any kind of particular follow-up to that moment. No one seems to check on him. But the other person who's aware of it is Mace Windu. And Mace Windu seems to be acutely aware, more than anyone else, of Anakin's mental state, significantly more than Obi-Wan, throughout the entirety of Revenge of the Sith. And clearly has a better clue than anyone else how close to the edge Anakin is. And even then, when Anakin comes to him and says, Palpatine is a Sith Lord, he says, thank you for this. I trust the fact that you brought this to me. I will deal with it. And he's clearly grateful, and he feels that Anakin has affirmed his place in the Jedi Order by doing so. And then Anakin chops his hands off. I'm sorry, but Mace Windu is not the person in the wrong.
No, absolutely not. And I think there was a reason why Mace Windu was the person in the movie who Anakin told. I think it was important, and I think George Lucas showed it for a reason, in that it's not just a bias that Mace Windu has. I think once that moment had happened, he did say, like, if you've gained my trust, like, just stay here so I can deal with it, because I know you're emotionally compromised. I can feel it in the Force. He was not wrong in any turn of these films. And this was not a self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh, because Mace Windu did this or behaved this way. No, Anakin made these choices regardless of the people around him. Those were his choices. And I think that's probably my biggest complaint about the discourse that happens about Jedi, is that you're operating under the assumption that people aren't capable of making their own choices. Even if you're backed into some corner, like that Anakin felt like he was, he still chose to kill people. He chose to murder a bunch of children. He chose to subjugate the galaxy. So I don't think that a little blunt talk from Mace Windu is responsible for that choice.
No.
I feel like we've covered a lot of my main topics that I had for this. So before I jump into the next round, the lightning round, do we have any final thoughts on the Jedi, their philosophy, their attachments, and how you feel that they're perceived by people who think they're wrong?
I think the thing that does seem jarring to most people is the idea of, like, going to the Jedi Academy at such a young age. You know, like Obi-Wan barely remembered his mom. He thinks he had a brother, you know, that in a way that's really sad. I don't think any of us can really imagine that. But I think that what people need to understand is that this takes place in space, you know?
Yeah.
It's not going to be just like it is here. Just like when people say that the Jedi should have gotten Anakin therapy. I'm always like, okay, where? Where in the movies did they show, like, the psychiatrist's office in Coruscant? You know, it's in space. You don't know when it was. It's a fantasy.
It's also, I find the therapy comments interesting, both for exactly what you're saying, is that it's applying sort of real world. They're treating it as if this is a real collection of people who exist in our real modern world, and then you're applying real world mores to it. The other part of it is that, like, fundamentally, Anakin's problem was an unwillingness to actually devote himself to the ideals of the order that he wanted to be a part of. So that was Anakin's first choice, was to not embody the things that the Jedi embody. And, you know, obviously at times he makes those choices, but, like, he needed to make the choice to give up emotional attachments. He needed to make the choice to lead a life that was based on change, that was open to change, that was not afraid of losing things, that was not afraid of, you know, losing his relationships, losing his identity, like as related to his mother and him being a kid who grew up on Tatooine. And those are really hard choices. I'm not saying that this is a really easy thing for him to have done, but therapy is not that. Therapy might have, like, I don't know, allowed him to deal with the trauma and the grief of growing up as a slave. I'm not saying it wouldn't have benefited him, but I'm not also convinced that it would have made him a better member of the order. It might have just made him a more emotionally stable person. But that doesn't mean that he's then going to choose to make those choices. And this is why I feel like Anakin was not a good fit for the order, and why you have to get people so young is because I think it is really difficult. I think it's a huge ask to ask a child to give up on the emotional connection they have with their mother. I actually think that borders on a completely unreasonable thing to ask, which is why the initial response to the Jedi was maybe not. And he never gave up on fear. He was never able to admit that he was afraid, and he was never able to look past the fact that he was afraid. And it's slapping a very Western band-aid on a very Eastern philosophy in a way that really bothers me, because it's this assumption that this individual intervention, this one-on-one therapy, which is therapy is becoming, I don't know whether it's the BetterHelp ads or they're never going to sponsor us after this, but everyone's really into therapy now. And I don't hate therapy. This is not an anti-therapy rant, but therapy is a very individual-minded intervention. And if you've ever met anyone who's going through therapy, all they talk about is themselves. And that's because all they're doing is looking inwards at themselves. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but that is almost the antithesis of the Jedi philosophy. And I think a lot of Western ideology is about looking inwards and about thinking about yourself as an individual. And I think we could maybe do with a little bit more understanding of the fact that that is not a baseline or a universal norm, and B, that it's not the only way to be, and that it's not wrong to live in other ways. I'm very bothered by the fact that a lot of people describe the Jedi as unfeeling, uncaring, emotionally abusive. But abusive is thrown in there too, and it's like, people live their lives like this, man. I mean, not with the magic powers, but what?
You're telling me this now?
I have some fun news about East Asia, man. They've all got magic powers. It just, I don't know. There's underneath it lies a not very nice thing that I don't enjoy. That was a really long rant.
Yeah. I loved it.
I think that he had to have gotten there's different kinds of therapy, I'm sure they spent hours meditating. And the Obi-Wan, it shows the kids doing Tai Chi basically, There's just many different kinds of therapy.
Yes.
I keep remembering that comic, The Last Padawan, what Deepa says to Caleb Kanan.
I literally have it on my screen now because I love that so much.
That's not unemotional. That's not abusive advice. It's the truth, and it's said with compassion.
Yeah. The quote is, "You must not grow too attached, too fond, too in love with life as it is now. Those emotions are valuable and should not be suppressed. But you must learn to rule them, Padawan, lest they rule you."
And that is the best piece of advice you can get.
Damn good advice.
On that wonderful note, are we ready for a few rapid fire questions?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Question number 1. What would convince you to turn to the dark side? It probably could be anything.
Yeah, it's probably going to be, do I want to admit this? It's going to be killing someone, which is a horrible thing to admit. But if I was you know what, I could just take out some...
Sig, I thought the exact same thing. And then the second thing I thought was, wow, that's what the Jedi Council did, and look what happened to them.
Yeah. I do some strategic global assassinations.
Oh, okay. Here,
it's a terrible idea too, because it's one of those things where it's good intentions, disastrous results. I think a lot of people would kill Hitler, right? And the modern day equivalent, do I take out Putin? Maybe. But yeah, it would end badly. It would end badly. I'd become too attached to the idea of power and my ability to kill people I don't like, and then I would kill someone for petty reasons, and then I would just I'd become a monster of my own making, and then
no.
it's a negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My answer was so mundane. Mine was like, if I could have like, I don't know, bottomless shrimp or something, and I didn't, there's like a pathway to have as much garbage as you want and it doesn't do anything to your body. Like, I would probably take up that offer.
I mean, at least I'm selling my soul in a bid for world peace. You've gone for bottomless shrimp.
Yeah. I mean, calories not counting, that's pretty nice.
I mean, because I've been working out, right? So I'm always like aware of what I'm putting inside my body these days. So I'm like, if I could just eat garbage, like just if I didn't have to think about any of this ever again, and like that might convince me. Like if that was what Palpatine imagine he did have a different person. He's like, have you ever heard of the story of Darth Plagueis and how like
I went to the shrimp buffet and never gained weight.
That is the tactic he would use on this person.
He had bottomless brunch every day.
This is what he would have to do for me if he was trying to convince me. The image of Palpatine doing that is just too funny to pass up. He would do it. I know him. He's slippery like that. What about you, Annie? Was it similar to Sig's?
Yeah, I mean, that was my first thought. It's the first thing that came in my head.
You had very noble answers. I had an entirely selfish answer, and I think that is exactly why the Sith, the dark side, is not a good place to be. I was the selfish dark sider. You guys were like, I had good intentions, and I got foiled by my own petard.
Yeah, I've often felt like, well, I mean, not often, but I'm sort of like, man, wouldn't it be better if just like maybe like at least one person didn't exist?
Yeah.
I mean,
the problem is there's so many contenders. Like, who do I take out?
I know. The problem. Yeah, that's the problem, is choosing one.
Yeah.
And I mean, once you do the first one, real easy to do the second. At least I hear, anyways. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the theory out there.
That's the theory.
We don't know anything about this personally, just so everyone's aware.
Yeah.
There have been no political assassinations from the Carbon Collective.
Oh, if Putin dies before this airs, I'm going to look real bad.
I know. Let's hope for our sakes nothing gets us in some hot water.
It's all right. I think he's immortal.
Okay, second question. There are many Sith Lords that we are aware of at this point in our Star Wars journey. Who would you rather be the apprentice to if you had to?
Maul.
Really? After seeing what Savage went through? Are you sure?
Like, none of them are going to be fun. Let's start there.
No.
Yeah. Palpatine would amuse me, but I think that he's actually a lot smarter than Maul. So I would be in more danger. Whereas Maul is mean, but he's kind of scrappy, and I find him incredibly funny. And I feel like I've been in enough toxic work environments to know how to keep my head down when it counts. And I think Maul would not see through it as effectively as Palpatine would. And also, yes, I did watch the arc with Savage, and I watched when Palpatine turned up. Which one of them did he have a better time with? I rest my case.
And I mean, I feel like eventually you would be able to learn Maul's, the way he acts and manipulate him yourself,
Exactly. I think he just needs a friend.
Yeah, he's lonely.
Look how he treated Ezra. He was recruiting. Ezra looked like he wasn't having the worst time. I would argue that Ezra being courted for recruitment as a Sith apprentice had the best time of anyone we've seen recruited as a Sith apprentice, aside from probably...
Yeah, I agreed. Yeah.
The only exception I'll give is all of the times that Palpatine definitely took Anakin underage drinking.
Oh, yeah. Yo, you have a point with the Ezra, because he was already calling him my apprentice. He was like, let's be friends. Yeah. Like, we can have a good time.
Dooku was really mean to Ventress, so I'm not going there.
Yeah, no. Maul is a good choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, respectable. I think he saw, like, when he saw Ahsoka in that arc in Rebels, and he was like, my almost apprentice. Versus,
it was like a reunion of people he's weirdly uncomfortably tried to court.
Tried to bring to his side so he can have friends.
Yeah.
See, my answer, I boldly was going to say Darth Plagueis. Because I feel like I would have a lot that, well, one, Palpatine would no longer be his apprentice, which is a good for everybody. A net good. I want to know. I want to know the story. I want to know the truth. And I probably wouldn't kill him in his sleep, but I don't know. I just feel like there's more there I'd like to know about. I have no intelligent answer other than that.
I was just going to say, boy, have I got a Legends book to recommend you. It's called Darth Plagueis.
I know, but like living it is much different.
No, that's fair.
I reminded of our last episode with The Rise of Skywalker when we were listening to Annie talk about the script that never was with Darth Bane.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool.
It was Plagueis, wasn't it? You could be a vampire. You could be a Force vampire with Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
Was it Plagueis that?
It was Plagueis,
I thought it was Bane.
Yeah.
Yeah. See that was one of the.
See, I listened to you, Annie.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
I'm sorry. Wow, I should just bury myself now.
I know.
Sig is so mean to me.
I know.
I think I mean the Darth that would have been. I mean, that's not what this show is about what could have been, but like I think Darth Plagueis was something that like I think too many fans expected maybe. Vader, man.
Yeah, that's fair.
He's so temperamental though. Like his
I know, but I love the why is her name escaping me? I love her. The comics about the archaeologist girl. I'm having a massive brain thing today.
Dr. Aphra.
I love her comics. Dr. Aphra, thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Just the way that she handles him is brilliant, and like that's exactly how I would do it, and I think it would be a fun ride across the galaxy.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's really
he's volatile, but he's also hilarious, and I think once you learn how to manage him, like I don't know, it's a bit like having like a really wacky dog. Like once you've wrapped your head around it, it's going to be okay.
Exactly, yeah. You know,
once you know how to manage him, how to work around him, you can have a really good time.
Flattery will, and you get cool digs in Mustafar. It was a good choice.
Yeah,
really,
really good choice actually. Man, I picked the wrinkly of the old wrinklies.
Hey, you're getting immortality and vampire status.
That's true. I'm making a lot of questionable choices today.
All I've got is the option of future robot legs and sadness. Nothing nice ever happens to Maul.
No.
Poor Maul.
Poor Maul.
He could use a good apprentice.
Yeah.
You know.
He could use a smoothie for sure.
I can provide both
somebody
of those
to
things.
make him a smoothie every day. He would turn into a different person.
Totally would.
Can I get him a smoothie and a mindfulness journal and we'll see what happens?
Yeah. All right, final question. Now, suppose you're living in some time before the Battle of Yavin, and you are the proud owner of a hollow forum where you talk about your favorite Jedi and all of the things that people have misconceptions about, and you're doing it under threat of the Empire, so you really got to make your words count. On this forum, what Jedi thing would you go on the hardest about? Something that you want to debunk? Because you see a bunch of debunking videos on YouTube. What are some of the things that you would like? That's it. What's the first thing that you would come up with that you would want to talk about on this forum? I think I know what yours would be, Sig.
Hang on. What are the lies of the Empire that I'm debunking? Because I assume they're slightly different than fandom. Although Anakin definitely would have written several blog posts about how badly the Jedi Order treated him, and this probably would have become a rumor within the Imperial. He personally would have started the rumor and then fed the rumor until everyone was like, yeah, remember how badly they treated that one Jedi? They were so mean.
I know. Whatever happened to that guy?
Yeah. This is like item 1 on Thrawn's list of evidence that Vader and Anakin are the same person. It's probably also how Reva figures it out. Anyway, I feel like I would fall into like some kind of radical Twi'lek group by accident while looking at cat videos, and then become heavily radicalized about Twi'lek independence.
Yeah, they're pretty
yeah.
radical.
Yeah, and I would meet Hera, and they would like all have all of this evidence about how much the Jedi helped liberate Ryloth during the Clone Wars. And I would get stuck on a piece of information and attempt to convince everyone in the galaxy that Mace Windu did in fact float a tank over a bridge, and the Jedi are in fact that cool, and specifically Mace Windu was one of the most powerful Jedi ever. And I feel like that's on brand for me.
Yes, that is perfect. Mine is just I would start a thread on, I guess, the Separatist. I would probably like dox a lot of things and be like, oh, you know about that trade federation, that system, and you like, I would just go deep dive into all of that and be like, oh, here are your loyal senators. Like, I would do something like that.
Oh, I gave the wrong answer.
Why?
I would be an archaeologist on Naboo, and I would excavate the demolished statue of Qui-Gon Jinn, and I would find evidence to how he was originally a hero of Naboo.
Oh, I love that.
And I would reinstate him in his place in history.
What would your username be then? If
I don't know. No, I'm going to write this as a fully academic paper and be murdered for it.
Yeah.
Killed for the publication of the paper in the Archaeological Society of Naboo's journal about how Qui-Gon Jinn used to be a noted figure in Nabooian history. Because it says too many things about Senator Palpatine.
I think that's a great one.
The thing that I thought about was anonymous source. An anonymous source tells me that the Jedi never ordered the clones.
Ooh.
And Obi-Wan Kenobi showed up and said he did to save face.
My favorite bit about that is it's completely true and also completely unbelievable within universe. Like, it just sounds so fake.
So then I wouldn't get in trouble because no one would believe me. So.
Yeah. Exactly. That's such a good answer.
That's a really good one.
I feel like we had a really good discussion today on all the Jedi things.
Yeah, I hope if you're listening that you also thought it was a really good discussion today about all the Jedi things. If you didn't, we're on Twitter at Kyber Collective.
Yeah, you can go there and tell us how wrong we are.
To be fair, though, actually, if you really legitimately like believe in Sith ideology, please explain.
Yeah,
why?
I know you're out there. We got questions.
We have questions.
Thanks for tuning into the Kyber Collective. If you like what you heard, please give us a like, and if you got something to say, drop us a comment below. Both of these things help make us easier to find for other fans and are the best way you can support our work. If you'd like to keep up to date with our episodes, you can subscribe, and you can always talk to us at Kyber Collective on Twitter. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks, and until then, remember, the crystal is the heart of the blade. The heart is the crystal of the Jedi. The Jedi is the crystal of the Force. The Force is the blade of the heart. All are intertwined. The crystal, the blade, the Jedi. You are one.